Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us on our first segment of Ask the Attorney. I'm Maya Engel. I'm live in our digital studio, and I'm joined by Mary Ann Wehr. She is an estate planning attorney. So, Mary Ann, thank you so much for being here and for answering a lot of really important questions and talking about a lot of very important topics.
You're so welcome. I'm really happy to be here. When the idea of this live stream came up, I was like all ready to be in it because I am really all about education. And it felt like this kind of dream come true because these are all the topics we'll talk about over the course of the next few weeks are just very near and dear to people's hearts. Some people know a little bit, some people know a lot. And I really am eager to, invest my time and energy in education. So,
Well, we really appreciate that. And in a minute, we're going to talk more about exactly what estate planning is. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit more about you, Mary Ann. So I hear that you are pretty familiar with Northern Michigan.
I'm pretty familiar with Northern Michigan. That's true, Maya. So I was born and raised here. I went to the same elementary school as my grandfather. My parents were born here. My brothers, my grandparents. I have the same kindergarten teacher as both of my parents and my three brothers.
Oh my gosh.
So those are unique stories. Traverse City is really my roots. But over the course of time, I spent a lot of time downstate, right? So I lived in the Lansing area in Okemos, and my husband and I bought a getaway in Mackinac City. So for years, we would go to Mackinac City. We were like a block from the bridge. You could hear the clunk, clunk, clunk of the cars. And I really got to know and appreciate the people of Traverse City. Loved the idea we could get to the UP and, have a little drive and loved it. We ended up buying a little different home in the Sheboygan area. And we were making that our home. And we were right on the Sheboygan River. We could boat on the inland waterway. We just really came to love the people of that area. They're amazing spirit. And I just feel very much at home in Northern Michigan. So I'm really happy to be bringing a service to Northern Michigan that I think is important to people.
Sure. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that service that you do provide? You, of course, are an attorney, hence the name Ask the Attorney. But yeah, just give us a little more detail about exactly what you do.
Yep. So we're going to start our segments talking about estate planning. That's not the total scope of my knowledge, but it's where we're going to start because we've learned that it's really interesting to people. So I am an estate planning attorney. My law firm is Great Lakes Center for Estate Planning, PLC. It could be no more descriptive than I'm an estate planning attorney, right? And I love estate planning because it really allows me to make meaningful relationships with clients. This is really something that has become a passion of mine. And I'll tell you, Maya, it came about through, I'm going to tell everyone a bit of a personal story, but it's one that I'm saddened by and proud of. My son was a paramedic and a firefighter, and he was so dedicated to serving his community. He was 33 years old and he acquired COVID on the job. And he had been quite frightened of COVID through the pandemic. At the same time, he was resilient. He was not leaving that field. People were leaving. The community needed him. So he was just dedicated to a life of service. Unfortunately, he acquired COVID and he died on Christmas Eve of 2021. His wife had just turned 27 and she was 7 weeks pregnant. And he had owned his home and other things prior to their marriage. So his wife was thrust into this world of losing her husband, a first pregnancy, and then the kind of the grasp of the probate court grabbing onto her. The way that his estate was structured, she needed to probate it, which we will talk in future segments a lot more about probate
Mhm.
what it is, how it can be avoided. But it really drags a person through court rules. You have to identify people. You have to notify people. You have to take a complete inventory of everything that the decedent, the deceased person owned. And and at that time, what you really need to be doing is grieving and taking care of yourself. And the court process just didn't allow that. So I watched my daughter-in-law, along with us. She was really in the heat of it, um, just struggle with that process. And then at the same time, my husband and I looked for an estate planning attorney to help us shore our plan up because
Mhm.
our son had been so much a part of our plan. And I really had a very difficult time. I couldn't find one. And that's when I realized that this is an area where more lawyers need to go into. It's an area where I can continue my son's legacy of service. I'm so proud to do that. I carry him with me every day, and every day I can give that same energy to my clients that he gave to his community. And so, if you go to my website, you'll see that there is one of my pages is in memory of my son. It tells a little bit about him, has some wonderful pictures. But I guess the upside of that is he has a son now, and his wife is doing much better. We are still in contact, and we just saw our grandson a couple of weeks ago. So there's the good side of that. But so what I do in memory of and in honor of my son, and I am just finding so much joy out of helping people through these difficult times,
Yeah.
or avoiding what can
Sure.
become very difficult.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank
that's
you so much for sharing your story. You can tell just from listening to you that you have such a passion for helping others, and it's amazing what you are doing. So thanks again for sharing that. Um, so you have a boutique law firm. What exactly does that mean?
So a boutique law firm, in my view, is one that's just right sized to serve the people that it serves, right? So I do estate planning, and we're adding a probate lawyer, that can help people haven't done a lot of estate planning. And we're not a jack of all trades. I don't do divorces. I don't do bankruptcies. I don't do drunk driving cases. I do estate planning.
Mhm.
And so not everyone that wants to walk through the door is the right fit for me. But what I do with people who are not the right fit is I try to find the right fit. So in my network of lawyers, I try to point out the others. But I really am focused on estate planning for all of the reasons I previously
Right.
stated. But I would also add that I am a boutique firm. I'm also a virtual firm. So you can meet me at my office if you'd like. We can find a private conference room and have a conversation. But I do meet a lot of people over Zoom.
Okay.
It's especially in such a broad area. I notice the further away you get from Traverse City, the less services there are,
Mhm.
like legal services. So I can meet people over Zoom. Some people choose to meet me. There's a great coffee shop downtown that has little conference rooms you can rent. They meet me there. They're comfortable in that environment. I've been kind of thinking, as things quiet down, maybe we could go to a winery, but we'll see how that goes, right?
Right.
Um, but so I can really meet people in their homes, talking about private topics without the intrusion of making a long commute, finding my office, looking for parking. And I
Mhm.
really like it. I find that people really like that service as well.
Yeah, makes it easier for everyone.
It does. It really does. The other thing
So
I do is I hold workshops
okay.
every other week at Centerpoint. Those are in person, but I am working on being able to stream them and be a little bit more virtual with them.
Nice. So now the question that I mean, many people probably know this, but just to really break it all down, Mary Ann, what exactly is estate planning?
That's $1 million question. It really is. It's I think everyone has a point of view of what it probably is.
Mm.
I know our office gets a lot of calls that people say, "Hey, I need a will," right? So to some people, that's an estate plan. Um, to others, there's just various. Well, for me, I would just like to say that an estate plan is really an act of love. It's an act of your caring about your family and setting things up, like what do you do with your stuff, right? And setting things up, giving your family the peace of mind and a roadmap, so they can fulfill your wishes without the intrusion of strangers, really, I would say. If a person wants, they can set their plan up to be outside of the probate process, outside of the public eye, and I think that gives people a peace of mind. It's not the right fit for everyone, but it works. What a estate plan is like a roadmap and a plan that's unique to your family for your needs and your wishes.
Mhm.
And I have to say, I was watching your 6 o'clock segment today, and you were talking about the guardianship.
Yeah.
And do you know that guardianship documents are part of an estate plan? So that if something happens to you during your life,
Mhm.
so it's not just about your death, but if something happens to you during your life and you become incapacitated, where, you know, the court of law says you can't make your own decisions or medical, then you can have documents in place that have already made those choices, have already made the choices of who will take care of your finances, who will take care of your healthcare decisions, who will be your guardian. And so today, when I saw that segment, I was glad to see that, there's legislation moving through that may help this, but it really is part of an estate plan as well to have
Yeah.
that. And so in a couple of weeks, I'm going to bring guests in. I don't know if I told you that. I'm going to bring some guests in to talk about various topics, to kind of add. So I'm not always the one talking, but I'm going to, a person, a ethics professional from Munson has agreed to come chat with you and I and talk about like healthcare, powers of attorney, advanced health directives. And
Mhm.
these are all, it's very topical to your message today. So, we're really going to spend some time in these more kind of challenging topics. But and stop me if I'm going on and on, but an estate plan really isn't all about your money, right? It's about protecting what you have,
Mhm.
giving direction for what you want. And when you think about all of that, the reason I say it's an act of love is you are helping. Like if I put my daughter-in-law in my vision, it would have been so helpful for somebody just to give her an instruction book and say, here's what's going to happen now, instead of her having to work through every, little small detail. So, you have to ask yourself, if I were to die today, am I comfortable that I've taken care of everything for my family?
Mhm.
And um, most people might say, I probably have some loose ends, so even just getting the guidance of how to transfer your property, what to do with it, the ways, right? That's when a estate attorney really knows, a estate planning attorney really knows the ways, the ins and the outs of the various strategies. And it also creates legal documents. So, an outcome of good planning are all of the documents and probably more that we have just been talking about. But those documents are legal documents, and they really should be um, developed by a lawyer,
Mhm.
and guidance should be given to you as a lawyer. Um, so, from a lawyer, that's what I'm meant to say. So it can include a will. It will include a will, healthcare directives, living will, power of attorney for your finances and your healthcare. Revocable probate avoidance trusts is one tool. Asset protection trusts is another. Multi-generational, tax savings trust. There's just many different ways. And I've noticed up here, there's a lot of I don't know that concern, but there's a lot of family cottages,
Oh
and
yeah.
succession of family property is really part of the planning process. It impacts taxes. It impacts, long-term viability of the property. All kinds of topics.
Yeah.
So it's really very encompassing, very unique for the individual families, and it's not like a one size fits all, check the box, fill in the blank.
Right.
Um, so I don't know if I answered what an estate plan is, but
Yeah, you did. You did great. And before we
pretty
move
broad.
on to more questions, I just want to remind everyone watching that if you do have any questions for Mary Ann, you can leave a comment if you're watching on Facebook on our Facebook. You can reply if you're watching on X or comment on YouTube. And we will try to get to some questions at the end of our first segment. We do have some on our Facebook post already. So just a reminder to you folks watching that you can ask any questions. And if we don't get to them tonight, we will in the future. But so Mary Ann, one question that I was wondering after you were explaining exactly what an estate plan is, like you mentioned, you never know when something could happen to you. So is there a certain age, or does someone need to be, how old should someone be before they start making an estate plan?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Another topic where people will come to me and say, my parents need an estate plan, right? So it is. So the age really isn't not what's driving. I mean, one of the things we'll talk about is when your child or your own child turns 18. Maybe they don't need a will and everything else, but they should have a healthcare power of attorney so that you can help them in the event that there is need. But people of all ages need something, I would say. But once a person starts having a family, a will, and it's really hard to think about because a will identifies is the place you identify who that a guardian would be for your children
Mhm.
in the event that both you and your spouse die. And I know that's really hard to think about, but I worked with a woman who was just an amazing woman, a great spirit, had me laughing every day, so full of life. And I knew her family. And she was from a family who every year they would go to Wisconsin to the Dells around 4th of July time. She and her husband and their 3 kids and mom and dad and then all of her siblings. And she used to say, I'm glad that my husband is an only child because
We don't have room for
there's
everyone.
not enough room. That's right. Well, one year, one year they went, this lovely, lovely family went, and she and her husband, her 3 children, and her mom and dad were all staying in one cottage.
Mhm.
Down the row was her sister, and across the way was her brother. The cottage that she and her immediate family were staying in blew up.
Oh
It
my
exploded.
God.
Um, and apparently there had been a construction, company that like dinged a propane line or something like that. She and her husband perished, and her 3 children lived, and mom and dad lived. So to those of us who believe it can never happen, that was the saddest experience of my life with that. I mean, her kids were all at Key. She had 3 kids, 2 twin boys. They were like going in 9th grade, and a daughter who was just going into middle school, so like 6th grade or whatever. So they were all at key points in their lives. I was never so thankful they had a close family, but imagine, the first thing that's going to happen, or everybody's going to raise their hand unless they had a plan to raise those children. And then
Right.
there's going to be, conflict and sometimes the court will decide if you haven't decided. And I think that's a key point. It's actually a key point about an estate plan that I didn't mention. And that is, if you don't create an estate plan, guess what? the government has one for you.
Oh, gosh.
Pull it right out of the hat, and everything that you own will go to probate, and the government will decide who gets it. And they have a chart, right? If you were married, your spouse gets so much. If you had children, your spouse and children get so much. If you don't have them and and it will continue to go out until it finds, this law will continue to go out until it finds an heir. And so you have the government making decisions about where your property's going. In the case of guardianship, you would have the government making the decision. And as we saw earlier today, the government doesn't always make the decision that you would like them to make, right? So, so you have the government making a decision about who will raise your children, unless you've, been proactive and made an estate plan. And that kind of comes to another story. So I go to a lot of conferences, and this one isn't as personal to me because I didn't know the people, but there was a CPA at this conference who was talking about her own life story. And this was an estate planning conference.
Okay.
And her own life story was she and her mother lived, when she was a child, lived with her mother's significant other, and they were not married, but they'd lived there for years. I mean, this young girl at 10 years old had no idea what, if they'd meant whatever. Well, the man died. And because there was no will, and because of the way the property was deeded, the government found like a great niece to give the house to. That great niece kicked the 10-year-old girl out and her mother and sold the house.
Oh, gosh.
Great niece didn't even know that person. So that's what the government can do if you haven't made your own decisions, right?
Right.
So that is why, even if you don't feel like, as parents, even if you don't feel like you have a lot of assets, there's a reason for a will, and there's a reason to think about this.
Sure.
There's a reason for the will for guardianship. There's a reason for guardianship of your children. There's a reason for documents to identify what to do if you become ill or incapacitated, like your story earlier today. So age, that's a long way of telling you age doesn't matter, isn't it? But yeah, it is, it's really an important thing.
Sure. So you mentioned a big key is if you have kids, that's probably when you should start to consider. So
I think that's when you should start to consider.
okay. So like for me, I'm 25, I'm single, no kids. I probably don't need to think about it yet, right?
But you should probably think about the healthcare power of attorney.
Okay.
Right? So that somebody of your choosing, if you were ill, and couldn't make your own decisions, could make those. We'll talk about that more with Stephanie Van Slyke when she comes on in a couple of weeks, but it's a really good topic. But yeah, you're right. You probably don't need a will, but you do need some documents, because I imagine you might want your parents involved in, helping you if you needed that kind of help. Yep. So
how much money should a person have before they consider working with a lawyer to complete an estate plan?
So, that's another great question. People will often say to me, oh, we don't have much. We don't have much. We've got a house, but it's, jointly owned by us, and we've got a little bit in the bank. But again, I think it goes back to, what do you have children? Children are a real key point for me. In making that determination. And what are your goals, and what's unique? Are you comfortable with the government making decisions for you, or do you want to make your own decisions? And the less complex something is, that the less complex creating the estate plan is. So it's not a matter of, well, I said it earlier, it's not one size fits all, right? But it's really not just for the wealthy. And it's just as complex as your situation is. And some people with very complex situations just want to keep it as simple as possible. It's really up to the individual, but with guidance from a lawyer. Yeah.
Right. And this is something that you kind of touched on earlier, is a will an estate plan?
A will is Yeah, it is part of an estate plan,
Right.
right? And I did kind of wander into this topic, but I'm glad you asked that question. As I said, that's what comes to mind for most people who are thinking of an
Right.
estate plan. And a lot of estate planning has to do with, how to control your assets, how they're distributed after you pass away. I'm aware that, boy, the time is flying
I know.
by.
I
But
was thinking the same thing.
yeah. So, but one of the goals of some people in their planning is to avoid probate, which is
Mhm.
that court-driven process. A will does not do that. A will is probated. So what it does beyond, is it says put the government's plan aside. This is what I want, but it still needs to be probated. Again, we'll talk about probate later, but
Mhm.
it doesn't avoid probate. Um, and it does avoid the state's law, um, which the state laws we've already talked about probably could completely ignore your wishes because no one knows them.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so I just think that a will is fine along with other planning documents, right? So
Sure.
the key is that a will alone isn't an estate plan,
Yeah.
but a will along with those documents that will help you with if the worst happens. I'll tell you
Mhm.
what, I fell off my porch, broke
Oh,
my shoulder last year, and walked away. I had a couple surgeries, so I've been in, Munson and met great doctors,
yeah.
but I kept thinking, how did my head not get involved in that? And I mean, it was a bad break.
Mm.
Had my head hit the cement,
Would have been a
no,
different story.
right? And that happened like that. So, it's really a good idea to think about all of those pieces. A will is a part of it, but
Not the
there's
whole
other
thing.
documents. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So then once someone does complete an estate plan, are they good to go? They can kind of just put it on a shelf and walk away? Or
If I could just tell you the people that come into my office and they're like, "I did this about 20 years ago. Do you need to look at it?" And and I think and I say, "I don't know. Have your kids grown up? Did you sell your house?
things change.
How have things changed?" Because,
Yeah.
I harken back to Jimmy Buffett, right? Some of it's magic and some of it's tragic. And that's gonna either way, it's gonna change. You might have some very difficult awakenings in your life.
Mhm.
Your beautiful 5-year-old may have grown up to have some dependencies. And you want to help that person, but you know that giving them everything you dreamt of giving them free and clear probably isn't the right choice. So there's just a lot. So the answer is no. I recommend building a relationship with a lawyer and knocking on the door every 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
In fact, I'll do those reviews for nothing for my clients because it's just so important.
Yeah. So really anytime there's any sort of life change,
Yep.
should
Yep.
probably
A big life change is a good time to think about your lawyer. But the truth is, when you buy your first house, are you gonna think about your lawyer? Probably not,
probably
right?
not.
So if you just put it on your calendar, like every couple of years, I need to at least think about, how's my estate plan? You'll do pretty well with that.
All right. Well,
Um,
good to know. We have a few more minutes. So very briefly, do you want to answer a couple questions from some of our
Absolutely.
viewers?
Happy to do that.
Okay, so someone asked on Facebook, Judy, she's wondering what a ladybird deed is. Does it cost to set one up? Can she do it herself?
So Ladybird deed is a very powerful deed. And there's, as with everything, pros and cons to it, but the other name for it is an enhanced life estate.
Mm.
And how it's enhanced is that as the owner of property, you can record a ladybird deed or an enhanced life estate plan or a life estate deed with like Grand Traverse Register of Deeds, that's where mine is, right? And what that does is it identifies a beneficiary for your property. So it will say, when I die, my daughter Sarah is going to get my property.
Mhm.
But between now and my death, I can do anything I want to do with it. and Sarah has no control over my decisions. I can sell it, I can lease it, I can mortgage it. Because Sarah would be taking on the house with full mortgage if that's what I did. But the idea is I can do anything with it that I want, including revoke the Lady Bird deed if I'd like.
Okay.
But in the end, if I've done nothing and the property still stands, even if it's mortgaged, even if it's leased, it will become Sarah's. And it's a very powerful tool. It's not, and it avoids probate too. Your home does not go through probate if you have a Lady Bird deed.
Okay.
And we'll talk. We can dive into that deeper too as we move along with our segments, because it's and it's strategic. It is fact driven when you would use it or when you wouldn't. But I and many other lawyers use a lot of them.
So, does it cost to set up a Lady Bird?
Well, so there is a cost.
Mhm.
There is a lawyer to draft it. And call me biased, but I would use a lawyer. This is your real property. This is your home. This is, worth whatever it is worth. And it's probably your highest valued asset that you have. I would just want to do it right. So save yourself. I wouldn't try to save a couple $100 on that, if it were. But it also is, and you'll hear me say this a lot, it's part of an estate plan. So just using it alone without other tools is not really an estate plan. It can be done, right? But like, for instance, my husband and I have a Lady Bird deed that the beneficiary of our Lady Bird deed is our revocable living trust, which we'll talk about trusts too. So it's not a person, but it's the trust. And so there's all kinds of ways to do it. But yep, it's a very good tool, very powerful. It will avoid probate. The other thing, if it's your personal residence at this time anyway, it will, if you go into a nursing home and Medicaid pays, Medicaid has a clawback, but it can't claw back anything that's not in your probated estate. And that would avoid it. So your house would be outside of it. So it's a very powerful tool.
Okay, good to know. So we are running out of time. So I think we will save the rest of our questions for next time. I will make sure to save those. And a reminder, if you folks do have any other questions for Mary Ann, you can comment on our Facebook post. You can email our newsroom. Our email is newsroom@upnorthlive.com. And we will try to get to them in the future. Mary Ann and I will be talking every other Thursday. So plenty of time to answer all of your questions. But Mary Ann, in the meantime, I guess, how can people learn more about all of this?
Sure. So you can call my office. My office number is 231-633-3282.
Okay.
And my website is, although I've got a long name for my website is M as in Mary, Wehr, WEHR, law, mwehrlaw.com. And you can find out more there. Like I said, I think my next workshop is November 16th at Centerpoint.
Okay.
Or I do 15-minute calls with people, and I'm really more than willing to educate and then go from there. So it's all about, for me, it's all about service. Yeah. It really is. So.
Well, thank you, Mary Ann, so much for being here today to kick off our Ask the Attorney series. You provided so much valuable information. We'll probably have to do a little recap of that when we talk.
I'm sure, yeah.
But it was also important. So the next time we'll be talking is not next Thursday, but the Thursday after that.
That's right.
You folks have plenty of time to get your questions to us before then. So again, Mary Ann, thank you so much for your time and your information. Thank you folks for watching, and we will see you in 2 weeks on the next Ask the Attorney segment.
Sounds great. Thank you, Maya.
Thanks, Mary Ann.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.